In 1985, Led Zeppelin crashed and burned, playing what might have been their worst gig ever in front of the largest live audience in all of human history. A live in-person audience of 90,000 and a live global television audience of 1.9 billion. Approximately 40% of the entire population of planet Earth at the time. That gig was, of course, Live Aid, and today I'm going to talk you through everything that went wrong during Led Zeppelin's catastrophic 3-song set, and also give you a little bit of the background story as well, so that you can understand why the biggest gig of their lifetimes was also such an unbelievable, appalling train wreck. Let's roll the clock back just for a moment to set the scene. During the first half of the 1970s, Led Zeppelin had been, arguably, the biggest band on the planet. Between 1970 and 1975, they were pretty much untouchable. But as that decade progressed, they released 2 back-to-back albums, Presence and In Through the Outdoor, which both received a mixed and sometimes negative reception. And then this downward trajectory was brought to a crashing conclusion in 1980, when Zeppelin drummer John Bonham passed away primarily as a result of alcoholism after drinking 40 shots of vodka in the space of 12 hours. After Bonham's death, the band called it quits and went their separate ways. The glory days of Led Zeppelin were done. The clamour for more, however, never really went away. In their absence, music was changing, and new megastars were stepping into the gap in the new decade, the 1980s. In 1981, Phil Collins of Genesis released his first solo album, Face Value, which hit number 1 in 7 countries around the world. Phil Collins was, at this time, massively on the rise, and he would go on to become one of the most omnipresent and successful artists of the 1980s. In 1982, Robert Plant released his first solo album, Pictures at 11. He was mates with Phil, and as Phil was one of the hottest new acts on the rise at the time, Robert Plant invited him to drum on almost every track on the album. Robert Plant released his second solo album in 1983, and this time Phil played on the record and came out on tour with him as his drummer as well. The two of them now clearly working together regularly. The next year, 1984, Robert Plant released something from one of his side projects, an R&B covers group called the Honey Drippers, and the most significant thing about the project to Zeppelin fans was that Jimmy Page was playing guest guitar. And in the background, Robert Plant was about to bring these 2 different sides of his career together, Phil Collins and Jimmy Page. And it would not end well. At this time in history, Ethiopia was going through a famine of biblical proportions, and musicians Bob Geldof and Midge Ure began working to raise money via music for famine relief. Their first move was to arrange the recording of the 1984 Christmas charity single, Do They Know It's Christmas, by Band-Aid. They had been aiming to raise £70,000 for the cause. The single actually, however, ended up raising £8 million. During that same Christmas period in 1984, Culture Club were doing a tour of the UK. And at their big final show at Wembley Stadium, they were joined on stage by some of the other artists from Band-Aid, who all performed Do They Know It's Christmas together as an encore. And it was there, in the heat of that moment, that Culture Club frontman Boy George put it to Bob Geldof that they should put together a full-blown benefit concert. Geldof took the idea and ran with it. And soon, behind the scenes, talk was rife. Word began to spread amongst the rock and pop royalty of the day that 2 massive concerts were being planned, one in Wembley Stadium in London and the other in Philadelphia in America. In his autobiography, Phil says, "In Dallas, Robert Plant asks me, 'Are you doing this show that Geldof's putting together? Can you get me on it?' Then Robert says, 'You, me and Jimmy could do something.' To me, this suggestion seems A, casual, and B, reasonable. The syllables Led and Zepp are never uttered. There is no talk at all of reviving Led Zeppelin, who haven't fired a riff in anger since the death of John Bonham 5 years previously. No reunion, nothing. So, no talk of making a big deal of this, and no talk of rehearsing. There's no need. It's just me and Planty who have a history, and Jimmy Page coming in on guitar to have a bit of a blow. What could possibly go wrong? Phil Collins did as Robert Plant requested and facilitated getting him on the bill with his R&B covers group, the Honey Drippers. But now in the background was also Jimmy Page, who had some exciting and much bigger ideas. Knowing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Jimmy Page wanted to reform Zeppelin, or at least 3/4 of it. And what's more, so did Zeppelin bass player John Paul Jones. Phil recalls, "Meanwhile, over in Plant and Page world, one thing has led to another. You, me and Jimmy may be doing something together has become the second coming of history's greatest rock band. This is a development of which I am blissfully ignorant. Robert hasn't called, so I don't know that John Paul Jones is coming too. All of a sudden, it's Led Zeppelin." But it wasn't quite, because Robert Plant, who had originally signed up as the Honey Drippers, had already asked 2 session players into the gig. UK session player Paul Martinez on bass, and Tony Thompson, drummer for Chic, behind the kit. And, making matters worse, Robert Plant seemed unwilling to let down any of the musicians he'd invited to come and play the biggest gig of the millennium, even if it meant they had 2 bass players and 2 drummers in the live band, not playing to a click track, I might add. So, without Phil Collins' knowledge, this kind of loosey-goosey jam set with the Honey Drippers had now morphed into a full-blown Led Zeppelin reunion, quite possibly the most high-pressure gig of the decade, which would undoubtedly require what Queen were doing at the time: rigorous rehearsal in preparation, hyper-focused practice. But this whole thing had been kind of cobbled together, and Phil just couldn't do that. Being by this time one of the biggest pop acts on the planet, he actually ended up getting roped into performing for 4 different bands at Live Aid, including his own, all in the same day, in England and America. He played one and then jumped on a Concorde, flew to the other, and played that as well. Because of his massive profile, Phil was effectively being used not so much as a musician, but more as a face, as a representative to inspire people to give as much money for famine relief as possible. So they made him as visible as they could, and it seems he did know what his role really was, and was happy to play it. Years afterwards, Phil would look back and express some curiosity as to why Robert Plant didn't just ask him to take a step back. Another word comes down the pipe. I finally hear that Robert and Jimmy want to rehearse. Rehearsing is the last thing I want to do, especially as that would need to happen in America. I've just come off a 2-month tour, and I want to spend some time this summer with my kids. Anyway, I know those songs. I saw Zepp's first gig. I'm a fan. I later find out that they've also asked former Chic drummer Tony Thompson to play. But Robert still wants me on board. I wonder if it's because he doesn't want to let me down as a mate. Perhaps I might have thought differently if I hadn't underestimated the Led Zeppelin reunion juggernaut. Anyway, I tell Robert, you rehearse it, tell me the songs, and on the plane over, I'll woodshed it. I'll listen to the songs on my Walkman. To woodshed a song means to listen to that song and practice that song over and over and over until you've completely mastered it. But Phil Collins' overstuffed schedule and reluctance to rehearse wasn't the only hindrance to Led Zeppelin's preparations, because Robert and the second drummer, Thompson, were on tour in the US at the time, with the end result being that they ended up only managing to rehearse together for approximately 2 hours. It seems that every major player in this band made some mistakes in preparation for this gig, but possibly none more so than Phil Collins, who had promised to woodshed the material and then did not. This of course meant that he rolled up on the day of the show woefully underprepared. I start making my way towards the Led Zeppelin caravan. It's immediately obvious that Jimmy is, shall we say, edgy, jumpy. It slowly dawns on me. These guys have been working pretty hard in preparation for Live Aid. It's a big deal for all parties, except this party, who, perhaps naively, has not quite grasped how much is riding on this performance. Then Jimmy looks at me. So, he says, part drawl, part growl, you know what we're playing? Yeah, I say. The only bit I'm still a bit green with is the flamenco guitar part before the solo on Stairway to Heaven. Well, what is it then? Asks Jimmy. I think it's this, I say. No, it's not, smirks Mr. Page. What I think Jimmy's actually saying is, do we really need this guy? Do we really need him to be playing with us? I'm made to feel like the guy whose gate crashed the party. I'm looking at Robert and wondering, have you told him? Have you told anyone why I'm here? I'm here because you asked me to get you on this fucking gig. And then you said, maybe you, me and Jimmy can do something. That's why I'm here. I didn't come here to play with Led Zeppelin. I came here to play with a friend of mine who's morphed back into the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, a very different animal from the one who invited me. Page said, my main memories really were of total panic. John Paul Jones arrived virtually the same day as the show, and we had about an hour's rehearsal before we did it. And that sounds like a bit of a kamikaze stunt really, when you think about how well everyone else was rehearsed. But all hope was not lost. The band still went ahead because every single person on that stage was a talented and experienced musician. Phil would not get the chance to prepare notes with them beforehand. Still, with luck, it would all hang together perfectly.
The Live Aid opportunity came up, and we didn't have to sort of play that much. So theoretically, as everyone was up to speed individually, then we ought to be able to come together and I mean, it was really, really, really a wing and a prayer, this.
But now we come to the gig itself. For the live broadcast, they had a very slick producer in control of which camera shot was being shown at any one time. So if chaos was breaking out on one area of the stage, they would very quickly switch to a different view. So often we only get brief glimpses before the camera hastily switches to something else. But now we're going to comb through and try to put together all of those little moments that we can to assemble the entire catalogue of what went wrong for Led Zeppelin at this, their most disastrous of live shows. The set opened with an introduction from man of the moment, Phil Collins.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce some friends of mine to you. Would you welcome Mr. Robert Plant, Mr. Jimmy Page, Mr. John Paul Jones?
But after a whooping introduction from Phil Collins, there was almost 2 minutes of dead air before a note was struck, as roadies desperately ran around the stage trying to find monitors so that the band could actually hear themselves.
There'll be a short intermission while I get some monitors.
A few seconds later, however, there's a big squeal of feedback, which I think means the sound engineers tried to turn the monitors up, they started feeding back, and so they had to pull them back down again.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Which also means, right from the word go, the band couldn't hear themselves play. It was a very hot evening in Philadelphia, and when Jimmy Page was handed his guitar for the first song, Rock and Roll, it was apparently already knocked out of tune, presumably by the temperature and humidity. Right from the word go, the two drummers clearly have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and there are a ridiculous amount of drum clicks as they try to work out how the hell they're going to come in.
The fact was that the drummers didn't know the material, so we were in real trouble. And we had like half an hour to rehearse or whatever, or an hour, and we're still trying to get the drummer to do the opening for Rock and Roll. And it was said that Phil Collins knew the set, and so we went on in the end to this huge, massive audience, and neither drummer knew any of the numbers at all.
Finally, the band launched into the only thing Jimmy Page said they had rehearsed in their 1 to 2 hour rehearsal session, the intro to Rock and Roll, which both drummers screwed up. And then Robert Plant's voice breaks, literally, on the first note he sings. And then, right after, Jimmy Page, who is acting quite strangely throughout the entire set, kind of stumbling around and pulling these strange facial expressions, somehow immediately gets tangled up in a mic stand, which he nearly pulls over. As the song progresses, it's clear that Robert's voice is already completely shot.
Let me get back, let me get back, let me get back, baby, where I come from.
Every time he goes for a high note, it breaks badly.
Been a long time, been a long time. Open your arms, open your arms, open your arms. Baby, let my love come running in.
And the fact that Jimmy's guitar was apparently well out of tune might also be the reason it disappears from the mix completely at one point.
Lonely, 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 lonely time. It's been quite a while since I walked in the moonlight.
And then Robert's voice goes again on the last note of the song.
Lonely, 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 lonely time.
Regrettably, however, rock and roll proved to be the technical highlight of the set. After a few stray riffs from Jimmy, the group launched into a rendition of Whole Lotta Love so ragged it threatened to descend into complete chaos. Now, Whole Lotta Love actually started okay. There were no obvious massive screw-ups in the intro. But throughout the first verse, Robert clearly can't hear himself to sing in tune.
You've been cooling, one night fooling. I'm gonna send you back to school.
And then him and Jimmy both sing the chorus into the same mic, but because they have no monitors, it just sounds like a couple of drunk blokes in the pub yelling into a karaoke machine. But the place at which this song really goes off the rails is in the iconic middle section breakdown. With Page's Les Paul now tuned to the key of whatever, and Robert's vocals still the wrong side of grim, it also appeared that neither Thompson nor Collins knew the rhythmic cues to Jimmy's stop-start solo, or when to start up again after he'd finished playing it. At Live Aid, the band were just doing a very short version of that normally super extended psychedelic section. And then, after the guitar solo, neither drummer comes back in the right place either, leaving Jimmy to start playing the riff again and then wildly shaking his head to signal them to get the hell back into the song. Page said, "Robert told me Phil Collins wanted to play with us. I told him that was alright if he knows the numbers. But at the end of the day, he didn't know anything. We played Whole Lotta Love, and he was just there bashing away cluelessly and grinning. I thought that was really a joke." And then at the end of Whole Lotta Love, it's clear that no one knows how the song's supposed to end either, so it just descends into this mad load of noise, during which even Jimmy Page goes out of tune as well.
And I've seen the footage of it, and there's this point where I can see on my face, it's like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. It's like a death knell. You can hear it ringing, you know.
And the last song in the set was Stairway to Heaven, and here we and they got a reprieve for a few minutes. The beginning part of this song is just Jimmy and Robert who knew the song back to front, so just for a little while, it was going okay. But of course, as you've probably guessed by now, neither of the drummers knew where to come in, so halfway through this quiet beginning section, you can hear them giving stick clicks in completely the wrong place.
Oh,
And the unspoken hero of the gig so far, the only one who seemingly doesn't put a single foot wrong, is bass player John Paul Jones. But for this song, he moves over to keyboards, and this is where Robert Plant's session player moves on to bass. And he plays a part that, in my opinion, just has completely the wrong tone, is way too busy, and just sounds totally inauthentic. As the song progresses, Jimmy gets tangled up in his scarf, tries to get it off and fails, leaving it stuck wrapped around his guitar jack for the rest of the gig. And you can also really see that Jimmy looks like he was not entirely on planet Earth for most of this concert, which Phil Collins also seems to imply in a later interview, saying, "It was a disaster really. Robert wasn't match fit with his voice, and Jimmy was out of it, dribbling. It wasn't my fault, it was crap. It's only later when I watch the clip that I see him dribbling on stage, actual saliva, and he can barely stand up as he's playing. Keith Richards does that and it's beautiful to behold, but Jimmy just looks like a baby giraffe." You may remember that backstage, Phil Collins had already admitted to Jimmy Page he didn't really know the drum stabs on the fanfare section. But it turns out neither did Thompson. And so, when the song reaches that middle breakdown section where the drums are supposed to play those stabs along with the guitar, once again both drummers miss their cue. Tony alone comes in late, playing the stabs wrong. And Phil Collins, who had not learned the part he was supposed to be playing, just sat there staring at Tony the whole time. And then Phil Collins clatters back in, out of sync, for the guitar solo. And the solo starts out well, but it does quickly devolve into some fairly nasty noises. And it is also capped off by Robert coming back in early, before Jimmy has done his finishing flourish. And then, to both ice the cake and add insult to injury, Jimmy drops his pick. We don't see it, but we do see the roadie giving it back to him. In the outro, Robert Plant's voice goes again. And, poetically, the gig comes to a close with one last wail of feedback.
She's a stairway to heaven.
Bearing in mind what Led Zeppelin had sounded like live at their best in their prime, this was nothing short of a disaster. And yet, if you were one of the people there in person in the audience at the time, I suspect it was actually pretty magical. I imagine the fact that it was Zeppelin themselves, the thrill of the occasion and the sheer volume of the thing would have meant you still really enjoyed the gig. Live Aid was a very odd thing to do, Plant told Tom Hibbert of Q 3 years later. Yet, through it all, the rush I got from that size audience, I'd forgotten what that was like. I'd forgotten how much I missed it. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't drunk on the whole event. Indeed, Zeppelin's performance might have been horrible, but the 95,000 strong crowd still roared in approval. 15 minutes after Zeppelin had left the stage, thousands were still chanting for them. Before the band took to the stage, donations stood at £800,000. 60 minutes after the last chords of Stairway rang out over Philadelphia, that total had increased to over 2 million. The band themselves, however, in a post-gig interview were subdued, and it seems apparent from the dynamic and body language all round that Jimmy Page had given Phil Collins an almighty bollocking the moment they came off stage.
How long did it take to assemble everybody in this large group?
We didn't actually assemble. The three of us know what we're doing, and everybody who helped us did their very, very best.
So I said to Robert, could I play? This was a while ago. And then and I wanted to play with Eric, you see. So I just came here to play the drums, and I had a good time. So that was what I came here for.
You may have noticed there, right after the gig, Phil admits that actually he requested to play, not the other way around, as he claims in his autobiography. And the truth was, as Jimmy Page probably knew, the live audience that had been there and experienced the in-person rush were actually a tiny minority. The overwhelming majority of 1.9 billion were viewing the gig through television screens all over the world, where the performance and all the fluffs could be very clearly seen, heard and picked apart. Of course, in this video, I have focused in on the things that went wrong, and there were plenty of bits that were fine. The problem was, just fine was not good enough for Led Zepp, and fair play. In the years that followed, Jimmy Page laid the blame for the gig squarely at Phil Collins' feet, but I think there might be a little more to it than that. As I briefly touched on earlier, I think every single member of that band went on stage knowing that they had one or two weak places, one or two blind spots, and they were all hoping that the rest of the band would be able to carry them in spite of those weaknesses. Plant's burned out voice, Page's seemingly out of its state, both drummers' lack of thoroughness, the lack of rehearsal, and so on. Unfortunately, however, if you have a band going on stage where every member is hoping that the rest of the band will carry them, what you actually get is the entire band all simultaneously falling into the shit together. A massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, and if you would like access to bonus content and to be credited at the end of videos, the link is down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time.